Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of Craig Houston Box 2. And in this episode, I'm talking to a man and wife who have got children who have been affected by the transgender policies through our schools, and they're far more knowledgeable to talk about a subject that I've been looking into and discussing myself for a couple of months. So we will be blurring their faces to protect not just their identities, but more importantly, their children's identities. So they're not getting embarrassed about mum and dad talking about this on camera. So hence the reason we will be blurring them. And I will be talking to them as Chris and Esther. And I'll explain why we're talking to them as Chris and Esther as we go along. So Chris and Esther, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me into your home, and secondly for giving me your time, because I know this is obviously quite a delicate subject, and discussing it's maybe not something that you want to be doing every day. So I do appreciate you reacting positively to the request to talk to me. So could you just give me a wee bit about, a wee picture of your sort of family build up, and then we can go into what happened with two of your children?
Okay. Well, where do we start?
We brought up our children as...
We're a family of 5. We've got 3 children. Yep. We brought them up. I guess we'd say we were liberal, but we also did attachment parenting. So we had a very close bond and a very loving relationship with our children right up until this all started, when it was all blown apart.
So when did you first have your first inclinations that there was something going on with your children?
So our eldest went into first year in 2019, and our middle was in primary 6, which is when the RSHP starts with the main bulk of their gender ideology teaching about transgender. Our eldest joined the Pride Club in school. She went down to the hall to the choose your clubs, and she saw the rainbow flag, and she just went straight for the colours, went straight for it. She had come from a primary school background of being diagnosed with autism, having no friends, never being invited anywhere, and basically nobody wanted anything to do with her. But the minute she joined this Pride Club, she was accepted and she was loved and taken on board, which was great. We thought it was lovely. She was making friends. Things seemed to be turning a corner. Then she came. So what would happen is she would come home every day, and we'd have our family meals, and we'd start discussing sex and gender, and we'd be discussing all the LGBT stuff, and the tea came later. But we were at that point, it was just discussions, and it was exploration, and we were supporting them. We talked about it all the time. So my eldest would come home and say, we start off saying that she was gay, and then she said she was lesbian, and then she was bisexual, and then she was asexual. And we sort of cycled through all of these different terms, and we talked about them, and we
even before we got to cycling through, she was so excited to be part of this club, and it was very much a theme. Every meal time it was talked about, and how great everybody was, and how wonderful it was to be gay, and what a great life. And we went to Pride marches with her and got flags, and it was all a very exciting thing. And
we thought we were supporting them by exploring, rather than just. And I mean, we would never have done this, obviously, because we were liberal. We would never have gone, no, that's terrible, you can't do that, you're no way are you gay, that's awful.
Actually, a funny story about that. Well, funny story, but when she first told us, she watched an awful lot of TikTok videos or short videos on various platforms. And also the other thing is, being an autistic person, or being on the spectrum, she goes full into everything. So she picks up her cues from learning them off how people react in television, for example, and she watched an awful lot of these videos. So when she first told us, it was almost like a scene from a sitcom where she expected us to jump up and start shouting or running out, or some big scene. And we just said, that's great, very happy for you, dear. And she was very surprised. But it played very much into how an autistic person approaches something. They go, if it catches their interest, it fully catches their interest. But at the same time, her method of behaving is if you like, learnt. It's a sort of mask.
Yeah, and I think society, I think for any child, when I was a child, to come out and tell their parents they were lesbian or gay and bi was probably not even a thing back then. I was brought up in black and white, so would have been tough for both parties. But I think the society we live in just now, I know through close friends whose daughter came out as gay a few years ago, and it was like, okay, it's no big thing. So, for your child to come home from school and find this club, and especially when you paint a picture of the life up until then, where probably quite a lonely existence at school, and finding this thing, whatever it was, it wouldn't matter what it was, if it was stamp collecting or a rainbow flag, that, there seems to be this acceptance, there seems to be this bond now with people, you would welcome that. You would be very odd not to.
If they know at that age and they're happy with it, then, it's healthy, I think. And, parents would be happy that their kids are advancing in a healthy and cheerful way, if it's authentic.
Yeah. So this period where I imagine you would be happy as parents finding something, regardless of what the something is, that, your child who has struggled, forming relationships with other children.
Yeah, so she started to have lots of friends.
Yeah.
She was in first year, and there was 5th and 6th years who were taking her under her wing, and she just started to feel she felt part of something. And of course we were happy that she was making friends, and that we had no inkling that there was any problem up until that point. So, apart from when she started to cycle through like every single possible sexuality and gender, and it just became a bit much, because one week she was gay, next week she was lesbian, then she was bisexual, and then she settled on non-binary for a very long time. She was non-binary, she was they, them, and we just kind of trundled along trying to just live our lives. We didn't really think much of it until things started to take on a bit of an ugly turn. Our middle child kind of stopped talking. We found out that they were self-harming. They were, they seemed to be very unhappy and confused. And we didn't really understand what was going on. Something had changed, and we weren't quite sure what it was. I eventually got hold of my middle's phone, and she had written a note saying, "I want to be a boy." And from there on, we started the whole discussions with them, about how puberty is a difficult time, and they're going through lots of different emotions. There's lots of different hormones going on. You don't know where you're at. You should give it time and see.
Can I just ask you, just interject for a moment? I'll explain later when we're off camera why I need to get things in my head in a certain order, and chronological order helps me. But you with both your children, about a 2-year gap, age gap, is that right?
19 months.
Yeah, so 2 years in schooling terms.
Oh, yeah.
So when... Are these both starting their journeys at the same time, the both children?
When the eldest was going into Pride Club, the youngest, the middle, was getting the RSHP lesson that told her that it's possible to be born in the wrong body, that sex is assigned at birth, you can be any girl or boy you want to be, and there's such a thing as transgender. It's brought in, and it planted this seed in her mind. It planted a seed of doubt, and unbeknown to us,
I was going to say, but also she follows her big sister very closely.
Yeah. But also she was late diagnosed autistic as well. So like my husband says, they take it all on board, and they run with it. They learn as much as possible about it. They immerse themselves in it. And of course, at some point, the trans and the gender ideology came in, and that set off a whole
and there's a
confusion.
tiny additional part with that, it was around the time of lockdown, but as part of the, if you like, the autistic process of learning all the information, social media played an enormous part. And what they accessed in social media is not healthy.
There was a lot of glamorization on TikTok and YouTube of these trans people with euphoria telling how wonderful it is. But obviously they don't realise that the beginning of that trans journey, there is a lot of euphoria because of the drugs that you're given, and because you feel like this is going to be the answer. There's a lot of euphoria that doesn't last. Absolutely. I mean, they're basically, their hormones are starting to kick in. There's confusion is rife, and
there's dislike of your changing body.
Yeah, especially if you're a girl. Especially when you're a girl, you have all these outside factors saying negative stuff about women and negative stuff about growing up into women, and they absorbing all of that, and they. Part of it is that they're wanting to opt out of womanhood, and they think that this is a way to opt out of.
So we're both your oldest and your middle child born female.
Yes.
And I mean, I think the journey that you've been on, this what's 4 years now, I suppose.
5, 6.
Yeah, and to deal and cope with that with one child would be a tough gig. And to have two would be a bit harder, but even if they had them staggered, you've learned for the first situation, you can maybe deal with the second situation.
Yeah. Well, we've learned from the situation with our youngest,
But your both journeys started similar.
And at the same time, one in high school and one in primary school with the new RSHP lesson.
So the oldest child attached to the LGB thing, right, originally, but the middle child, was that straight in trans? There was no middle ground, or you were aware of it?
There was a middle ground, I think, that wasn't talked about while she watched what the eldest was doing.
Yeah, so she rarely talked about it, and when things started to go a bit south and she was self-harming, both of them stopped talking at all about anything, and we would talk with them, and they would sort of disassociate and not speak back. They wouldn't say a word. They were completely mute about it.
And what sort of feedback, support, information do you get from schools, first of all?
Well, we didn't know what was going on at this time. We didn't realise that it was all connected to what was happening in schools and to what they were watching online. We were completely unaware at that point. We were completely blindsided, basically, because we didn't know. We didn't realise what was happening.
We also weren't aware of just what they were looking at on social media and the algorithms that took them deeper and deeper and suggested more things to look at, so that our middle started to look at forums and feeds about self-harming that were hugely encouraging and saying how beautiful it is and to go deeper. And
so she ended up on these Twitter pages that they're called EDTWT 988 TWT, which are basically self-harmers glamorizing and showing off their scars and their cuts, and they do videos and they talk about how it's really great to get this thing called beans, which is a certain way of cutting that you get little bubbles of fat tissue coming up, and it was horrific, absolutely horrific, the stuff that she was seeing. And they have these eating disorder pages where they have all these emaciated young children basically lying or standing thin, bored. And
do you know, as adults, we've never seen anything like it. And this was so easy for kids to access.
And this is before we managed to get hold of her phone.
And this is the younger of the two, so we're talking about primary age, primary 6, 7?
She was primary 6, 7, yeah.
So we're about 11 years old and having to see stuff that you're struggling to cope with as an adult.
It was around when she was starting secondary, I think, that lockdown started.
So to go back, so when things started to take a like a wrong turn, and they were self-harming, and they were definitely very, very unhappy. We got in contact with CAMS to see if we could get some help.
How long did that take to get her?
Well, our eldest was already part of the CAMS system because of her autism diagnosis, so they were known. She was known to them. So, and also because of the self-harming, we got mental health risk assessments quite quickly. And from them, so this is just before lockdown happened, we were about to get help from the school. The educational psychologist was about to contact us, and the deputy head was about to start some art therapy classes with my middle, and then lockdown happened. So the day before lockdown, the educational psychologist contacted us and said, we can't help you, we don't deal with self-harm, we only deal with educational problems. And I said, but this is affecting her education, this is affecting...
You've been brought on by your education.
Well, we didn't know that at the time. So she said, can't help you. Then lockdown started and everything stopped completely. So we were struggling through lockdown. I was catching up and learning everything that was going on with this gender ideology. And I was coming to the realisation that this was a very, very dangerous and terrible thing that our children had got caught up in. But nobody would believe me. Nobody would listen to me. And I was shouting the odds everywhere, and I was just being like put down as this crazy transphobic bigot who's talking absolute nonsense. So through lockdown, we tried to get various help. I tried to get self-harm help through Penumbra, but they don't deal with East Ayrshire, they only deal with North Ayrshire, and nobody could help me there. I mean, I was literally spending days phoning people, phoning therapists, trying to get help, I was just being blocked at every turn because people just didn't believe that this could be happening. So my eldest ended up, the CAMS offered them her an anxiety workshop, kind of therapy that way, which she did, and she hated, and she didn't follow because she was like an 11-12-year-old child who's not interested in read the paperwork about this, that, and the next of how to deal with your anxiety.
Put it in a TikTok video and you get a totally different response.
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. So then CAMS offered us family therapy, which we thought, that's brilliant. We thought it's an opportunity for us to discuss things, for the kids to be in a safe environment where we can all talk about what's going on, because we'd spent many hours talking to them about how, you know, puberty is a difficult time and your hormones are changing and things are difficult, and you know, it's normal to feel all in flux about stuff, and you just need to kind of wait it out and not suffer but kind of deal with it. But because they had in their heads that it's possible to deal with this difficult puberty by not being a girl and not having all of these things associated with that, all of the, you know, periods and breasts and things growing that aren't meant to be, and boys the same, things growing, and it's a difficult time for them. So this was an answer. This was the answer to it. Become a boy, and they won't have any of that. Identify as a boy, and they won't get all the hassle that females get.
Did either of your kids get put any through any medical, whether that be medicine or you've not had to deal with that?
So when this all started, we did get in touch with Sandyford. We thought maybe they could help them with talking about puberty and sex, because my eldest was getting older into that kind of stage, and so we thought that they would help us in some way just by discussing the normalcy of puberty, and that people feel this way and this is what happens and everything.
We went on the basis they were absolutely clear with us. There'd be no referrals, it was just a chat. We didn't need to worry about anything. It wasn't going to go anywhere. and they had the chats, and what they told us was not true at all, and immediately referred
Middle
middle.
to the gender clinic.
Without looking at any other options, as in, you might want to be a girl.
After an
It
hour.
wasn't even an hour.
It wasn't an hour.
It wasn't even an hour.
And with the eldest, they said that she didn't qualify. Well, that's the other thing. CAMS wouldn't give us any help with our middle because she didn't qualify enough as having mental health difficulties. She wasn't, things were not dire. I don't know. I can't remember the word they used, but basically she wasn't in a distressed enough place. Even though she was self-harming, she was wanting to be a boy, and she was mute. She was basically mute with us. She would not talk at all. So, and Cam said, "No, we can't help you."
Well, she wouldn't talk about it.
About that, yeah.
She would talk generally.
So
we're at Cam's.
Yeah.
No, so before that was Sandyford. Was it? I can't remember. It was around the same time.
They were around the same time.
So with Sandyford, we said, "Look, we've heard." This is when the mermaids and the Tavistocks scandal were coming out, and we said, "Look, we've heard some worrying stuff, and
we were very worried about what we'd heard about Tavistock.
We're concerned about our middle being pushed onto this path." And we got this like email back from one of the clinicians, a very standard, "Oh, everything's fine, there's nothing to worry about," but he signed it with a he/him pronoun, and I just looked at it and went, no, not having this. So the first appointment that they gave us, we were unable to make, and we told them, and then they made another one which we were unable to make, and then by that point we were like, no,
we're going to back out of this. Do you think possibly the whole lockdown and thing, do you think that maybe helped them not get pushed through the process of the medical options?
I think our knowledge, or my knowledge of what was going on, stopped it. And then the news about Tavistock and mermaids coming out, that also stopped us in our tracks and said, there's something not quite right going on here. We need more time. Our children need more time to grow up.
If they'd had access to the regular sort of healthy interactions with people and not spent their whole time, we thought they were on the computers working, and they weren't. And
or at least
deeper
like
and deeper.
Watching innocuous stuff, just enjoyable, fun things.
I
never thought for a minute that they would be learning about gender ideology online. And
we trusted them very much.
What was the horse and what was the cart? Was it stuff that happened at school that led to the online stuff, or did the online stuff happen first and then?
The school stuff happened in 2000. The RSHP was brought in 2018, and that's when my middle was in 6th, and I think the eldest was in 7. So this is when they start to hear about it, and then they go into high school where it's pushed even more, and they learn about it even more. And she's in Pride Club, and she's going to conferences where they bring all the clubs together, and they bring in speakers, non-binary speakers, and speakers who are identifying as the different. So they're learning about it all.
I think at that point things were beginning to change in other countries about how they approached it, because they very much followed this affirmation line in other countries, and then they began to see difficulties there. At the same time in Scotland, it was being pushed very strongly top down from the Scottish Government into education
when all the
and into
self-ID
policy.
stuff was happening as well.
And the Scottish Government's still way behind other countries on the evidence for it, and they're still pushing it very. But that's a step ahead. Kind of jumped out of order there.
Yeah.
No, and I think so. It sounds to me, and you've helped me in a journey here, so I do appreciate that. I'm not learned on the subject. I'm interested in it and I want to learn. But do you think, so it seems to me there's two things went into the pot here. There was the stuff that the school have got in the curriculum, and you've got the stuff that's on social media. Do you think if you removed one of them, we would have had where we are just now, or does it need the removal of both?
There definitely needs to be better moderation in both, and
better balance.
The third part of the mix is that it's not typical children this was being exposed to. So had they not been autistic, they wouldn't have gone into it so deeply. And the evidence now also shows that children who've suffered trauma, children with mental health issues, children who suffered abuse, also
are very susceptible,
very taken
vulnerable,
in, looking for something that will
looking for an answer to their.
Well, there's something else that I've been picking up on, and this conversation just cements that. There seems to be an unusually high number of autistic children.
So in 2018, there was a 4,000% increase in referrals to the kids clinic.
Sorry, what's that? The kids clinic?
Yeah, the gender identity.
Ah, right, okay. See, I'm learning a whole new vocabulary as well.
Yeah. So 4,000% increase. 76% of them were female, and of that, 48% were autistic. And that should have been a red flag straight away. And that's what when I saw that statistic, that's what,
I think
stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah, I think there's, whether it's intentional, whether it's accidental, I don't know, I'm not that clever. But it seems to me there's a definite trigger in autistic kids in the way that they take information that this is causing a trigger with.
Well, because this ideology is being touted as fact, and it's being taught as fact in schools, then obviously they're going to take it on board as fact and want to know more about it, learn more about it, and all the information that they're being taught is misinformation.
Did you tell me, or did I pick up, and it might be inaccurate, but did the schools start referring to them as males?
So we were having a lot of fighting at home. There was a lot of arguing. Think that when things took a wrong turn, we tried to talk to them, and they would fight with us about what we were saying.
And it was really alien for us and difficult to cope with, because we weren't a shouty fighty sort of family.
And it just we didn't understand what they were talking about. It didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And we were.
So with the names.
Oh yeah. So in order to try and calm things down, we said we'd compromise, and that we'd let the school use their other names.
The preferred names.
Their preferred names.
Yeah. They have this thing, there's me jumping in, that they pick a new name that they prefer, and they call the old name, they don't call it the birth name, they call it a dead name.
Wow, that's a weird way to look.
It's so ugly, but also every parent picks their baby's name. Yeah. So much love, and there's reasons to pick the name and family connections or whatever, and to call that a dead name, and to tell your parents using my dead name to their lovely living child, it's like stabbing a parent. It's an unnecessary level of cruelty, but an awful lot of this, and an awful lot of what they see online and how to approach their parents has a lot of cruelty attached to it. And they're told,
you'll find that if you talk to other parents, the stories are so similar, and the coming out stories of the kids they're all following a script. It's all very similar. Very same trajectory.
The kids are told, they're very strongly told through a lot of the information online in particular, that if your parents don't affirm, then they want to see you dead, you have to cut them off. And they're told that, and they're distanced from their parents, and it's almost cultish the way that is, because the parents are the big support. But the other huge aspect of that being so difficult and so dangerous is that some of the clinical guidance, or some of the school's guidance at the time, had been, if the kids want to change, don't tell the parents, exclude the parents from the discussion. And that is a major pillar of safeguarding removed.
They put it down as like really benign, also known as, it's no big deal. But the second that the school did that in the register, their old names were gone forever. They were never used. Yeah. Yep. That was it, straight away. But the other thing the school did without our knowledge and without our consent was to change their pronouns. We didn't know.
Then when we asked them not to, some of the teachers still did.
Yeah, it took a number of years to backtrack that. And it took us like nearly a year to realise that this was happening. We didn't know.
The reason that's really, really important is we're parents, we know our children, we love our children, we want them to grow up and explore and learn and discover themselves without being medicalised and so on. And we thought in our hearts that it's wrong to call them by different genders. It's wrong to say he to a girl. And we just, it didn't sit right, but then the evidence started to appear that was actually definitely wrong and dangerous. And
grave psychological risk.
When the CAS review came out and said there was a grave psychological risk, we told the school, and the school weren't really interested. The CAS report has come out with similar dangers, and there's been reviews from all around the world saying this is dangerous for children, and here in Scotland nothing is moving.
Now, the CAS report's obviously very topical, and I would imagine you have both read it quite thoroughly, and you have a far better understanding than me. And I know I was particularly upset, and I don't have, touch wood, by the grace of God, I don't have a transgender child. I've not had to go through your journey. I've got 2 children, and I've not had to do that. They're now 19 and 24, so I think I'm not going to have to deal with that, right?
I'm not sure.
Well, that's...
Can I jump
You're
in and
lucky
say something there, though? Because it could be a stage that kids go through, like in days gone past when kids wanted to identify as, you know, or emos or whatever, in days gone past. And if there wasn't the danger of medicalisation and the danger of drugs,
another emo phase, it could just be another childhood.
You know, if they live with it and they stick with it when they're in their 20s and later, when they've explored who they are, then fine. Or if they were to say...
But not fine, because they've been talked about it when they were children.
But if they were to say at that stage, I can come out of it and I can go back to my regular life, you know, and not be trans anymore without having been sterilised or, you know, surgicalised. But that is the definite danger that, and other, you know, some people make comparisons with the campaigning for education in schools about being gay, which was campaigned against back in, was it the 90s? I can't remember.
1928.
And
it's nothing like
and it's
that.
a nothing now, but there was no danger from that of medicalisation or permanent harm.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think society, I was born mid 73, and, you know, late 70s through the 80s into the 90s before I almost became an adult. So, you know, that was my sort of learning decade. And the LGBT campaign really did, you know, it made sense to me. You're like, well, especially as I'm an adult and I can marry and I can adopt and I can do all these things. But if you...
And it's a private thing. You don't change how other people refer to you. You don't change what toilets you use. Nobody's interested in it. It's your own private life.
Yeah, and I think the scariest thing about this whole thing for me, and again, I've not got anywhere near the knowledge that you guys have, but the scariest thing I think is these put on medication because it will help we can then put your decision-making process up the park.
They make it sound so simple, like they're just pausing puberty, but these puberty blockers are off-label. They're used off-label for these kids. They're actually meant for up to 8-9-year-olds who have started puberty.
And that's not even what they were really designed for.
Originally, they're used for castrating prisoners.
But they've not been properly tested on children. So
getting back to, you know, if it wasn't for the medical intervention that can really fuck up futures, right? Then you're right. It's a thing that, you know, you can deal with a bit easier, and you've got a long... Yeah, but with this, because there seems to be a drive for medicating these kids far too early. But as I was trying to get to earlier, when I saw the CAS report, I thought, well, this is good. This is a good bit of policy that we might end up with this. Things will change, schooling will change, etc. But then one of the first politicians I seen comment on it was Patrick Harvey. And I was disgusted. And I thought, what he said was he didn't agree to the science, right? Now, my outlook on that is quite simple, because I say I'd like to see things in black and white. Patrick Harvey advocates global warming, climate change, all these things because it's scientifically driven. Now, whether that's right... Well, this is where we're going with this. So we have to believe the science when it suits Patrick Harvey. But now, he actually would not commit to agreeing that this was scientific. And he said, no, I've seen too much pushback. And I thought, well, we're only hours after the release of this report. The only comment I've seen from non-medical people that wanted to doubt it was what I don't have any problem boxing them as lunatics online, because it was within hours, right? So the only people yeah, and what he was saying was, I've seen too much pushback to actually accept it. It's like, well, the pushback it is only the online community that are barking mad, right? So, and that's no doubt in trans people, that's trans activists. I can see quite a clear definition and difference, right? And I thought, that's where we are. We do not accept science when it suits us anymore. And that was where he was, and I was like,
listening to activists.
What's right?
They're listening to activists.
He's an activist.
The big disconnect is this is evidence about children, and some of the policy has maybe been driven by adults thinking what might be good for children, but this isn't coming from educational psychologists or experts in childhood development. This is coming from adult activists, and they might even have the best will in the world and really be aiming to help children, but what they're doing is imposing the same curriculum now onto all children and not taking account of those who are vulnerable.
It's a blanket approach.
It's a blanket approach.
Vulnerable kids into account.
Yeah, not taking any kids into account. And one of the things that I found, and my journey's been quite energetic and short, maybe a couple of months on this subject. But one of the things I found pretty fascinating, and I stumbled on it by pure accident, was there's now a split between the LGB community and the rest of the letters that they've attached to it. And that blew me away, because I fell for the PR. Because I just seen this as one thing. When the rainbow flag came out at first and people were wanting rights for the LGBT community, I kind of understood it. It wasn't a big issue. That makes sense. But then it sort of evolved through time, and I didn't notice the evolution of it. And then I thought...
But there's this misconception that trans people don't have rights and that we're trying to erase their existence, but they actually have all the same rights that everybody else has.
There's no trans genocide. I mean, I've heard that, and
it's transperbally.
So I believe there's a little bit of history with, for example, Stonewall, which campaigned so well for LGBT, but then they took on the T and dropped the LGBT.
Well, this is the thing, right? I've campaigned. This is the second sort of campaigning thing I'm on now, right? And the first lot of campaign was 10 years ago. And someone said, just follow the money. You'll always find the answer. Because I was like, who's benefiting out of this? Why is this a thing? You'll just follow the money. And it was my penny drop moment was talking to Jo Bartosz, who's a lesbian journalist, who I was like, what do you write about? And she says, I normally write about loads of things, Craig, but for the last 5 years, all I've ever wrote about is transgender stuff, because that's, I get paid to do that. The Guardian will phone me up and say, you're great to do that, go and do this. And it was through a discussion with her when I had my penny drop moment, and it's Stonewall. Because really, Stonewall around about, you were saying sort of 13 to 15, their journey was over. They'd got exactly, they started a campaign, they had a name which is quite clever, because then when you've won and you can stop campaigning. Well, they'd reached that position. Yeah. But then, so what do they do now? Does the funding stop? Does the CEO, the directors, all these people just stop working for Stonewall? Well, they've obviously went, no, I don't want to do that. So what can we do now?
There's a side element to it as well that I've read about, which is that it's still more socially acceptable with all of the push towards, if you like, trans life, to be a trans person in a relationship than to be a gay couple. And it has been commented, and I've heard from a number of gay people that they feel like they're being erased because it's easier to be trans than to be gay.
Yeah.
And there's still, somebody said the other day, internalized homophobia is still a thing, and there's much less issue socially now if you're trans than if you're gay. So I had often wondered if our middle was gay, and now chooses to identify as trans, but I wonder if that, it's difficult to get to the bottom of it and what would actually make her happier, as she grows older.
Yeah, and that's just something that's a different issue, but it might explain how they get to the point of I'm trans, because it's easier thinking, well, I'll just change my body because I'll still be attracted to the same type of people, but it will not be odd, inverted commas.
Even when this was happening, they were only 10, 11. They'd never even held a boy's hand.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, and if this is too deep a question, just tell me and I'll delete it. Have any of your children entered any relationships with other people? Maybe not full sexual.
When this first started, they each had a girlfriend. I mean, they spent time with them, and it was more like a friendship. The eldest, the middle, it was just like, I think they just said it, and then that was it. You know, like primary school kids, we're going out together, I like you, that kind of thing. I don't think they even held hands. I don't think my eldest ever even kissed anyone. She was in a relationship with a girl who was identifying as a boy at that time. They were like 12, 13. They just spent time together, like a friendship. Obviously later on, my eldest has been in relationships with boys, and they've turned sour because, as boys are wont to do, they've got one-track minds. I mean, and you know.
So if your daughter's had preferences for boys, then the oldest one, you know that.
Well, she went out with a girl who's identifying as a boy at the time. But I mean, they were just so young. It was.
There's nothing.
It was innocent.
A girlfriend's a girl that you've not shouted at in the playground today.
I still don't even think it's still innocent with my eldest. It's still just like a close relationship. I don't think it's. Well, I don't know.
You've had personal battles, and you've had.
Well, can we get back to CAMS? Because what happened with CAMS was we were offered this family therapy. It was during lockdown. The two of us tried it online a few times. It was very difficult, didn't work. Eventually, we were allowed to go in, and we went through this very long therapeutic process with one of the CAMS counsellors.
Which we believed was family therapy, and that was us having therapy.
Mm-hmm. We thought that this was an aim to bring the kids in. They went through our entire background, our entire family history in terms of mental health and relationships and just generations. The whole thing. We got this massive tree, and
also very deeply into what we thought, and we were completely open. Completely open in our thoughts.
We talked about the difficulties of name changes in our religion, and how we only change name if you're ill and then you recover. So you want to hide the evil eye, you change your name so the evil eye can't find you after you've recovered. So name changing has quite a big significance in our religion. We talked about everything. I was very open about my feelings, and I was very open about my questioning of this whole situation and this whole ideology of what was going on.
And at the same time,
unbeknownst to us, at the same time, she's having counselling with our eldest. We don't know.
Sorry, and you don't know?
No, we knew they were having the counselling, but we didn't know what they were talking about. We didn't know what was going on.
And as far as we knew, that was a totally separate counselling. So we were seeing her, and our eldest was seeing her, happening to see the same person, but they weren't linked.
Yeah, because one's looking after an individual and one's looking after the unit.
Yeah, so we thought that they were going to bring the kids in, and it never happened. And then one day she came in and she said that she was referring us to social services for not affirming our eldest he, him pronouns.
Literally just for that.
Now, our eldest had always said to us that they were they, them. They'd said they were non-binary. She'd also said that she knew she was going to grow up to be a woman, and she didn't want to have any physical changes. But then she went to this woman, and now all of a sudden, so she's coming out as he, him, and we're the bad people because we won't affirm. But we never knew about it. She never said that to us at all.
But the reason for the referral was unintentional emotional abuse. That's what she called it. And she said, we know you're a loving family, but for this one thing, she said, I feel it in here. She put her hand up to her heart. She said, I have to make the referral. And she had told her eldest that she was going to refer to social services, and said that there are these lovely people who come in and offer advice. She didn't give a broader view of social services at all.
She said they'll offer support.
Wow. And this was your oldest? And your oldest is what age at this time?
15 or 16. Must be 15.
Because it's like 14, I think it's. When was it?
But your child at this point has said, "I want to be they them." As far as you're concerned,
She's written it all over her door.
right? So it's they them, it's they them, it's they them. The school, it's they them.
Well, apparently the school was he him, but we didn't know about it.
Because the school didn't tell us and wouldn't reveal that information.
So this person, after all this hours, are probably analysing you.
Yes. Oh, that's what she
And
said.
she said, we all know how you think.
We said we don't use these terms in front of her. We did this whole what do we call it, linguistic gymnastics, to avoid using pronouns in the house.
Yeah, we did. We made a real effort to not upset the kids, to try and keep the peace by not using gendered language. So
even the chores list, for example,
we completely changed our
said
whole
eldest,
approach.
middle, youngest. You know, things like that.
We tried really hard.
You're actually, you're changing things to accommodate it, and then getting told at the end of all this analysing you're bad people, basically, and we need to involve others because you've abused your child mentally, unknowingly.
She literally said unintentional emotional abuse. And
where did that lead to?
Well, that led to us completely shutting down as a family. We completely stopped talking about any of it. We completely, like, all went into our own little trauma caves and just tried to carry on as normal. We stopped talking about gender stuff. We stopped looking. So when that happened, we had to keep sending our eldest to this woman until we found alternative. We
were scared to do anything that social services might come and say, this is a black mark.
So we were, for 9 months, 7 to 9 months, we were on tenterhooks, waiting for them to contact us.
And did the call ever come?
We phoned them.
We had to push it because we contacted them and they didn't know anything about it at first.
And then they got the referral restarted.
And then I don't know. So it could have gone on for years, for all we know. We got lost in the system. We could have.
But you know what? Then they were quite happy because by then we'd arranged therapy again for the kids.
Private.
And they were quite happy that therapy was going on. And they said, all we do is refer you back to CAMHS anyway. So we're quite happy to close.
So even the social services circle would have just took you back to their door?
Actually quite nice on the phone. But they said, we're quite happy to close the book and you can come back to us if you need us.
And what help would you have given? Oh, well, we'd referred you to CAMHS or suggested LGBT Youth Scotland.
Oh no, that's a horrific thing. That's an hour in itself, that.
I know. So,
was LGBT Youth Scotland a thing when your kids getting this involvement? I'm not sure
we weren't aware of them at the time.
It's a relatively new thing to me. And
no, they're the ones that pushed the RSHP as well.
We now know that they were there in the background pushing an agenda very strongly and being accredited by various schools.
This is a bit I find bizarre because there are Quango strokes. Well, that's what I was about to say. So they're getting funded, but now the schools have got to pay them for the privilege of giving them a rosette.
Yeah.
And you're like...
Which we now know, following CAS and from other studies, like the German study last week, that it's dangerous.
What the actual certification and this is great and use a good...
The affirmation path is dangerous.
That's the bit that I struggle with because... And again, I'm a bit pure bigoted when I describe it as such, but when it's a mental health thing, which I think this is, right? It's the only mental health thing where we say, yeah, go do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because
we don't affirm anorexics.
See if you see somebody standing at a cliff thinking, and you say, what are you doing? Oh, the world would be a better place without me. I'm decided to jump off this cliff. You would say, no, it's not. If a bulimic said, I'm really, really fat, you would say, no, you're not. It's that, isn't it?
No other.
And there's a bit more to that as well, because you take these kids with these underlying issues and you say, not as plainly as this, but you give them the idea that gender is the answer. So they go through all of this and they get to a certain age and they maybe find out gender wasn't the answer. But not only did they find out gender wasn't the answer and they'd maybe damaged their bodies, but they also, the underlying mental health issue was never treated. So, and that just, you can imagine, that just carries on in their heads and causes more and more damage. So maybe live with them for the rest of their life because it was not treated when they were children. So In fact, it's a triple whammy. Everything's double whammy. That's a triple whammy of damage to children to follow this ideology instead of looking at the child and looking at the whole picture and not just saying, here, gender, answer on a plate.
No, the whole thing is just bonkers, right? Because I can only deal with things that make common sense and logic. I need to apply common sense and logic to my thinking in any matter. And none of this fits, which is why it sits as a grey area with me and I can't cope with that. I need to input things into black or white. And I can't fit this into the box because none of it seems common sense or logical to me. That
gender ideology is based in queer theory, which actively works to dismantle the family unit by lowering personal boundaries and sexual boundaries. So it's all based in queer theory.
Yeah, but that's another thing that to me I struggle with, because back in the 80s and 90s, when particularly gay men, because with the AIDS epidemic, they were getting blamed for that and they were treated really poorly in society. Queer was a sort of derogatory way of describing a gay man. And now it's a term that's into this thing that encapsulates these gay men, and I think it's now something else.
But the trans community is an umbrella. They call it an umbrella. And underneath this umbrella are children and perverted men,
among other things,
and paedophiles, all under this one umbrella now as trans. They're all one and the same.
You do need obviously to be careful when saying that, but some of the people connected to this have been convicted. And some of them are very keen on blurring the boundary between child and adult sexuality, and that.
There's this other new term that's trying to creep itself in, and minor attracted person. Yeah. And you're like, no, it's a paedophile.
They're trying to get in under the umbrella.
But that's not, let's not make something seem nicer. I can understand why we would change names of some things. I'll give you a great example, and it's a horrific word now, but when I was a child and you came out of any large shop, there'd be a thing to collect money for the Spastic Society, right? Now, you would not use that term today. So I understand how sometimes you need to evolve terms that we use. Well, paedophiles is not one of them.
What's really scary is these organisations should be running 100 miles away from anything associated with child sexuality and minor attracted people and so on. They should be saying that's alien to healthy life, that's alien to our culture. We don't want to be associated with it. But there's so many people who have come out as have been discovered as being involved in it, linked to these organisations. It's really horrible and really scary.
It is horrific. So where are we now with the whole thing in your family unit? And is it getting better? Is it reached a plateau?
After the CAMS incident, we tried to get therapy for them. It's very difficult in Scotland because most therapists will affirm, so they'll use their preferred name and pronoun. We've
talked to them about various dangers. So our eldest, for example, genuinely believed that if young boys thought themselves girls, then they couldn't be a danger to her. So she thought, all the hormones going on, everything there, her belief system was, no, they're now a girl, there's no danger there. So there's various safeguarding. So we've had to speak to them about that because, for example, some youth groups have said they can share tents because they're the same gender.
Well, Girl Guides, Scouts, all of these organisations, they've taken on board this ideology and they now allow transgender males who are basically male in tents with the females.
See, I think society's gone bonkers, right? And I've got a theory that I'm trying to evolve, right? And I think I'm there. See, if there's any minority, whether that's colour, religious, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, sexual orientation or how they want to gender themselves. See if they've got a feeling of being oppressed, whether it's a perception or not, or something that they want changed in society. See if we can look at it and it doesn't affect the majority of people and nobody's harmed by it. Then it's like, okay, then crack on. And a good example of that would be LGB. Can we get married? Can we adopt kids? Well, nobody gets harmed with it. Doesn't affect the majority. Let's go with it, right? Let's take race. We used to use some really unpleasant terms to describe people with darker skin than us. And society went, well, I can understand why that would annoy you. Let's change, and we don't use these words now. So I get that, and that's probably how society should operate. But see, when you get a minority, and when it's like almost less than half of 1%, and we must change loads of things because they feel oppressed or things that they're not happy with, and it affects the majority, then that's when we need to say, no, we need to talk about this one. Do you know what I mean? We can't just go forever, like toilets, like, changing rooms and, shops, like other things, going to changing areas and swimming pools and things, because that does affect the majority.
It affects other people, and
it affects family life.
Affects families, and families.
The right to a family life.
I think family life is under attack.
Do you feel this is? Did you feel this is just the way things have went, or do you feel it's driven?
I think it's driven.
Very driven.
And that's a horrible bit. That's frightening.
A lot of these policies were put in under the radar. They were given advice on how to put them under the radar by Denton's lawyers.
Well, this is a bit that I find a bit peculiar, right? Like the gender recognition thing, Scottish Parliament, right? Now, see if, and we all went, well, no, that's kind of odd. It's no some society wants or needs. See if that was unique across the world, I could kind of understand it.
But there are lots of other countries.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But it's all round the world, almost at the same time, come up with the exact same notion.
I feel like it was a coordinated effort.
That ain't coincidence. How can all these countries round the world try to drive the exact same policies at almost the exact same time within a sort of time scale?
There is definitely a desire to make things better for people who identify as trans. And the problem is that it expands much further than what's needed to change some of the problems, and it expands down to children, it expands into families, and it goes beyond helping and into changing parts of society that needs a lot more research before that should be done, and it's just been rushed into.
Well, who I feel sorry for out of this, when we had the discussion, I can't remember if the camera was running or not, is I've had two lengthy discussions, and I'm not talking about for 10 minutes at a bus stop, and I'm not talking about just one conversation, but with two individuals who they felt they were gender dysphoric, right? Now, I don't know if that's a real thing, a bad thing, or a real thing or a made up thing. Some people suggest it's real, some people suggest it's made up, so I'm not an expert in that. But I'm quite happy to accept it could be a real thing. But that'll take such a small amount of people. Now, these two people had quite similar characteristics. And that wasn't dancing about behind a truck at a gay pride festival with a chain on and want to tell the world, hi, I'm a girl or I'm a guy, right? They just wanted to change their body in some way and get on with their life. And I feel sorry for them because they're not getting tied.
I feel sorry for a lot of the trans community who've been dragged into a whole big scandal, a whole big mess, not of their making. Instead of making their lives nicer and better and being more accepted, there's a whole bunch of people who've been riled up against, people who are trans, adults who are trans, and it's extended into a different sphere. And instead of helping people, it's made the whole thing worse.
Yeah. So, are you in a better place now? Is life all right now? Is it getting better? Or is it just plateaued out? Where are we?
What happens is, and a lot of families find this, is that you go along just mildly coping with things, and then there's suddenly what I call a trans bomb, where your child will open up and say something or tell you something. So for us, there's been nothing, and then the middle in between, changing from one therapist to another. She told us basically that this is the first time that she said it out loud, that she wants to go on prostate hormone, she wants to have top surgery. They use all these euphemisms and words to make it sound
not a mistake.
And and I'm thinking about bottom surgery. I don't want, so we got into this conversation. She doesn't want to be a girl. She wants to pass as a boy, and she knows that she. And I said, you know that you'll never be able to be a boy. It's just not possible. Yes, I want to pass as one.
And with the surgery, there's such horrible things to the
They don't. I
bodies.
mean, they don't know anything about it. And this was the first one, and then we have a heightened emotion state of upset and having to deal with what's this trans bomb that's been dropped, and then everything sort of calms down for a bit, and then there's another one.
So you can never quite
you
relax.
You can never relax, and you can never feel like, oh, we're out of this until either our children desist or we have an absolute knowing for definite what they're going to do. I can't ever settle. I can't ever stop worrying. I can't ever stop researching into this to try and find some like nugget or some morsel that might help my children understand what they've got themselves into. I can't ever stop until I know that my kids are safe.
Just now, we're in a place,
a bit of a lull just
having
now,
a nice
for
time.
sure.
But that's the word. Instead of being relaxed and saying this is lovely, you can't get rid of the
It's
feeling
always
it's a lull.
in the back of my mind.
There's something coming.
Always something. I'm on edge. I'm on high alert all the time, ready for it.
Yeah.
And we just had one where my 17-year-old blurted out that she's put herself on the Sandiford waiting list for testosterone. She did it about 6 months ago without telling us. And she only told us because, and this is the only time things ever happen and move on and we hear what they're thinking and feeling, is if I push something, if I ask them direct questions and push the conversation. Otherwise, we get nothing and we just carry on and pretend that everything's totally fine. But I feel like we need to talk to them more about it. We need to give them proper guidance and information, but it's so difficult to do it because they're so defensive, and we end up arguing about it, we end up fighting about it, or we end up being told you're the only people in my whole world that doesn't affirm, that doesn't accept me as I am. My friends all do, the school does, the college does, my friends' parents, everybody accepts you.
And I think that probably comes from just a human desire not to upset people.
Be kind. It's a be kind brigade.
Yeah.
But it's also lack of understanding of what's really happening with this.
See the journey that you're on. If you could have the knowledge you've got today and rewind the clock back to before this was a thing,
I would have cut it off at the past. I wouldn't have supported any of it, and I probably would have pulled them right out of school. I'd have switched off the internet. I'd have done everything possible.
I think the internet is a big one for me.
So I think one of the scary things, Lindsay, we spoke about before we started talking, who's the girl from Newcastle, and through talking to her and my search for knowledge in this subject, she said her biggest fear is, she described herself as being like a tomboy type character at school, and she's a lesbian lady now, right? So she was always going to be attracted to girls sexually. But she said when they were playing like nurses and doctors, princes and princesses, and it was a group of girls, she would always be the doctor, she would always be the prince, and she just enjoyed playing football, and she'd done all these tomboys things, right? And her fear is that her 8-year-old self, if she was 8 today, would be told she's a transgender.
She'd have been told she should have been born a boy. Yeah. She was born in the wrong body. But we can fix that for you.
So in primary school, they just say to the kids, you can be any boy or girl you want to be. And the heads explain to us that means if you're a boy who likes pink, that's fine, you can be a boy who likes pink. But they also say to them, but you could take that a different way, but they also say to them, there are men who were born as girls and women who were born as boys, and that's fine. And the school's line is, but we're not saying to the kids, you can do that. And I said to the head, but you could say to the kids, and to her that's completely fine. We're not telling them they can be trans. We're just telling them they're these people. I said, but you can say to the kids There are people that go into shops and take things without paying, and that's fine. So you're not saying to the kids you can go and steal, but you are, because you're telling them that one
You're
thing.
You're endorsing it.
Yeah.
And the kids, this child psychology comes into play here. They take that in as that is perfectly fine.
Do you think if the CAS report is totally embraced, unfortunately there's no suggestion that's going to happen right enough, but let's say, pretend for a minute it was embraced, do you think it does enough for education at that level?
Well, I think part of what the CAS report says is we need more research before we carry on down this line. So there needs to be the more research.
Balance.
So by doing that though, surely those who make the big important decisions, if somebody's learning disability saying, look, we need a pause here, then we have to have a pause. And I don't think that should just be on beta blockers. I think that should be on curriculum. Sorry, what did I say? Beta blockers are for heart problems. It's quite a different thing.
I think I need that. My heart's broken.
So that...
But you're right. That, I mean, a big part of CAS is we need more research, and we shouldn't be carrying on down this line until we know just how it affects children.
And I think that as much as medically and physically, it's also mentally. And I think that should mean that we should have a pause on everything. That's curriculum, the lot. And anybody that fights against that is like non-normal in my thinking, because, and I say this often, and that again,
a lot of people are fighting against it, thinking that they're doing the right thing and they're protecting gay kids and lesbian kids, but they don't realise exactly what it all entails and what it actually means.
Yeah, and I think the Patrick Harvey comment the day the CAS report that came out, and I thought, that's not right. That is not normal. You're actually denying the science here, but in other topics you're telling us you have to accept the science. So what are we doing here? And you can't pick and choose. And I think the biggest, most dangerous thing for me is the potential harm we're doing kids who are probably more likely not to have been trans if nobody done anything.
Well, we've heard from children who've desisted, and these are kids who had some issues. They've all got the same story. They've literally all got the same story. They had some kind of issues in the background, some trauma or whatever, and they were given the seed in the RSHP, and then at secondary school they went to these clubs. They were affirmed by the teachers. They then thought, this is me, this is the answer. And then they've got into their early 20s and realised, hang on, pull the plug, something's not right here. And they've followed the same path, the same story. And if only they'd waited. They all say the same thing. I was led down this path by adults. If only I'd waited. And I think we're beginning to hear court action about these.
Sinead's suing Sandiford.
Yeah, the guy down in Newcastle, I think, is he not going through a legal thing?
He's also suing, yeah. There's a number of American detransitioners who are also suing.
I saw that video about What's a Woman, and some of the stuff that these people were talking on. I was screaming at the TV. This woman, and particularly, and she was like, "That's not what we're here to talk about." And he's like, "Well, it kind of is." You know the one I'm talking about? She was a practitioner and kids.
They can't handle it though when they're confronted with this stuff, and you say to them exactly, look, this is what you're doing. This is not right. They completely.
Yeah, and then the word battle comes with using words like bigot and transphobic and all these things.
It's not even the half of it, because some of the activists are extremely violent, use extremely violent language, and it's not like.
I've seen it. I was threatened on Sunday.
So people are saying we're worried about our kids, and the other side is, you are transphobic, you are a bigot, you need to lose your job, you need to lose your place in society just for asking the question. There's no balance in the discussion.
There's two things I was wanting to ask you, and I don't come into these things with questions. I come into these things just want to chat to people, and it normally goes in the direction. And I've been thinking about two things we've been talking. The first one, if the second one's off topic, it's not a problem. I won't ask it. But the first thing is, if you were to give any advice to anybody that might be watching this that's got kids that have not had any issues yet, or might be getting to that age where it's starting to talk about the curriculum, what would that advice be?
Talk to your kids before the RSHP lessons. Find out exactly what your school is teaching them, after school, because you're allowed to take your kids out of certain parts of the IHP. But really, it's about, it's sort of involving your kids and talking to your kids and letting them know that that the things they're teaching in school are not fact. It's an ideology, it's a contested ideology, it's not fact. Let your children know that there's trans people exist, but it's because of X, Y, Z, and tell them, you know, that just because, I don't know, I would say take your kids out of school, and I don't really know.
I would say watch their
On
social media.
hindsight, yeah, or definitely get do not let them on sites.
Unregulated, unrestricted
Yeah.
use of TikTok or whatever.
Unrestricted. Definitely lock down your phone.
Check what the school's going to teach them before they teach them, and just watch what they're doing online.
We'll be open about
and
it
let
if you
your
ask
kids
them.
know. Well, some schools.
Yeah.
Let your kids know that this is a thing, but it's an adult. It's an adult agenda.
Yeah. And the last question, and it's just something that you said earlier, and I thought, what did you mean by that? And if you don't want to go there, I totally understand it. You mentioned your religious beliefs about something about changing your name and stuff. What is your religion?
Jewish.
And you change your name?
If you've been ill,
you can,
and then you recover, some people will want to change your name to avoid the evil eye, so that they...
It's even before you recover.
Okay.
So you can change your name to sort of fool the evil eye and take the illness away. It's a superstition. It's not a written down part of the religion. It's like a superstition.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I get that. I've got Jewish friends. That's going to be a topic for discussion soon. No, that's interesting. Now, who? Who's my Jewish friend?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't know. His name's Lance. I'll tell you off camera. He's his name, right? He's a. I'm not. In fact, I was even going to tell you what he'd done for a living there. That's not right. Anyway, is there anything we've not covered? Is there anything that you want to cover?
I'm sure there's lots.
Well, I'm quite happy to do a part 2. That's not a problem. It's sometime in the future if you think of something you want to talk about.
I think that for me the underlying thing is we're talking about children and vulnerable children, and these are the and families, in fact, and these are the very people that we should be doing our best to give them a good, happy upbringing, and to be positive people, and not sending them down a path that might damage them. The last thing any education system should be doing is damaging kids.
By this everywhere. It's not just us.
Like Cass says, there just needs to be proper evidence-based.
There's thousands of parents across the UK that have children who have been captured by this ideology. Some of them have gone on to be medicalised and to have the surgery.
But most people don't realise this is where we are and this is what's going on. And most people think that couldn't possibly happen here because we're in a safe country where things like that don't happen.
We spoke about it again. We spoke about it earlier.
Society has pushed this so massively everywhere. Yeah. And my eldest is right. Wherever she goes, when she's not at home, she is affirmed.
The scariest story I've got, my own personal journey with this, and we spoke about it before we hit the record button, was when Richard Lucas challenged John Swinney when he was Education Minister about the curriculum. And I thought Richard Lucas was off his head. Because I'm thinking, we cannot be teaching what this man's claiming. Yet Richard was right. And I know Richard now. I've met him, I've spoken to him a few times. I think we've done it.
Yeah. But John Swinney was very much behind the named person policy that took parents out of a lot of the picture for their own children's upbringing.
Well, you look at the state of this country if they get everything passed they wanted to get passed. It would be a damn sight even scarier.
I'm so bad for Westminster.
I don't think you're unique in that. I don't think you're unique in that journey, to be honest with you. People that have went, I don't know if your politics were, wished independence before, now don't, but I think there's a lot of people that's a concern now, and it's definitely safeguarded us against it being even worse in protecting our children. But my stance is it, and I think it can sometimes become possibly viewed as misogynistic, where my default setting, and it's just, I blame evolution. It's just the way I'm programmed. If you're a male, you have an automatic pre-programmed desire to protect women and children. And if I know people, that's not, women can look after themselves, 100% agree with you. They can. But they've not always been able to do that because society...
It's innate, part of continuum.
But women have got the same pre-programmed.
What, sorry?
Women have got the same pre-programmed instinct
Protect their
to
children and
nurture and
family.
protect their family and their children.
So that's, that's where I've come at this whole thing from. And if I'm a bigot...
That's what queer theory does. It works to obfuscate language. Obfuscate, I can't remember. But and they look to tear apart that family unit.
Well, look, I've learnt stuff here today, and I'm, as I said to you before, I'm on a personal journey to understand this whole thing, and if we can help the outcome of the whole thing, then all the better, because if I was a 51-year-old heterosexual man that's kids are growing up and I didn't have to deal with these things in the curriculum and stuff like that, and if I'm learning...
It's rife in universities, though. I mean, universities are
Front line for
social
so many
justice.
things. Yeah.
And all that's where I'm coming at this from, and I think if putting this out, if 2 or 3 people learn something from it, then they tell 2 or 3 people, and we can maybe help get a resolution on it. So before I do my end thing, I'd just like to thank you both personally for inviting me into your home. And say often time is the greatest gift you can give people, and you've given me plenty of that today, so thank you very much for that. And to the viewers, if you enjoyed the video, I don't know if that's right terminology, but give it a thumbs up and share it about if you've learned something that you think other people could learn from, especially from horse's mouth tales from parents. You might know parents that are having to deal with these things that can learn from this shared knowledge. Please do that. And as I say at the end of all my videos, unless you're politicians that are driving this stuff and quangos that are earning money in the industry that's evolved around it and making fortunes, unless you're these people, everyone else have a great day. Cheery bye now.